Chapter 101. The Anbu openly robbed the Saratobi caravan. A sudden, powerful repulsion erupted, throwing Jiraiya, Orochimaru, and Sakumo Hatake out of the lounge. The three of them had been swallowed in the Slug Sage's resting place and were now plastered in sticky, foul-smelling mucus. Jingi didn't want his resting place messed up. Not to mention, Orochimaru was already preparing to attack Jiraiya. Before he could react, Jiraiya felt his body uncontrollably hurled through the air. Oh no, he hadn't even landed when a shoe sole filled his vision, rapidly growing larger. Ow! With a scream, Jiraiya was driven into the ground as Orochimaru stepped on his face and pinned him. Sakumo Hatake flipped twice in midair and landed solidly, watching as Orochimaru used hands and feet to relentlessly beat Jiraiya. Sakumo raised a hand, about to intervene. Fortunately, although Orochimaru was furious and fighting, he wasn't using weapons. Sakumo swallowed his words and ran to the edge of the rain to quickly wash the mucus off his body. "You stinky Orochimaru, how dare you hit me?" Jiraiya wailed between blows. "You bastard! Me, the Toad Sage, the great Jiraiya, won't let you off. Don't hit my face. I'm wrong. I won't make fun of you next time." After cleaning the floor and tossing the mucus-coated shoes into the trash, Jingi poked his head out and peered. He saw Orochimaru's foot pinning Jiraiya and his fists hammering Jiraiya's face. Jingi finally relaxed. Jiraiya's wounds hadn't fully healed, and Orochimaru hadn't been merciless. He was measured in his attacks, only trying to turn Jiraiya's face into a pig-like mess. Jiraiya's howls drew attention, but those who tried to step forward to break up the fight quickly backed away when they saw Orochimaru was the one doing the beating. After washing off the last of the mucus and changing into dry clothes, Sakumo shook the rain from his white hair and asked with concern, "Jiraiya, he should be okay, right? He'll live," Jingi said with a smile. Tsunade broke half his ribs with one punch and he was still jumping around. Orochimaru didn't try to kill him. One dared to court death, the other dared to strike. After giving Jiraiya a solid beating, Orochimaru turned and walked toward the morgue. He had been spending a lot of time there lately. Although his cooperation with Jingi had paused, Orochimaru expected it to resume, so he was preparing a batch of puppets. Bodies left on the battlefield weren't to be wasted. Why bother? After Orochimaru left, Sakumo ran over and hauled Jiraiya to his feet. Jiraiya's face was already swollen and pig-shaped. Orochimaru hadn't hit him with fatal force, but the effect was unmistakable. It hurt so much. "Damn, Orochimaru. I'll make him pay. Senior, can you help me wash up?" Sakumo instinctively raised a foot like he wanted to kick him, but seeing Jiraiya's pitiful expression, he softened. In the end, he helped wash the mucus off. Changing clothes, however, Jiraiya had to do himself. Sakumo didn't have the habit of dressing other men. Jiraiya's antics made many people laugh, but he had a thick skin and had been through worse embarrassments. If it had been someone else, they might not have stayed in camp. After putting on clean clothes, Jiraiya sat down to write, his bruised, swollen face peeking up from over the page. He decided the male lead in his next book would still be modeled after Orochimaru. Konoha. Tsunade was looking over a stack of documents when an Anbu ninja entered the office. "Director, the merchant convoy you ordered us to monitor has returned to the village. They're carrying a large amount of ninja tools and supplies." "Very good. Take people and confiscate all the supplies. Tell the convoy that the village is in a time of crisis and everyone must sacrifice and contribute. For the village, we need everything they have." "Understood." Those words sounded familiar. Hokage-sama had said something like that not long ago. The Anbu nodded and carried out Tsunade's orders without question. At the village gate, Saratobi Kaisho, responsible for the convoy's transport and security, breathed a sigh of relief. As head of the clan's merchant convoy, he had led the trip to the land of craftsmen to purchase a large haul of ninja tools and supplies at the outbreak of war. Goods bought at normal prices could be sold for much more in the village. One trip could bring in a substantial profit. "Stop!" Kaisho was about to tell his clansmen to hurry into the village to unload when several Anbu squads appeared and halted the convoy. "Anbu? What do they want?" people murmured. "Everyone, these supplies must be transported directly to the Anbu. Please leave immediately to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings and conflict." The Anbu didn't care which clan one belonged to. Even though the convoy was Sarutobi property, orders were orders. When the Anbu drew their weapons and began pushing people back, Sarutobi Kaisho grew anxious. Is there some mistake here? These supplies are ninja tools, yes, but they were purchased by the Sarutobi clan in the land of craftsmen. We have legal paperwork, personally issued by Hokage-sama, the Anbu captain replied coldly. The paperwork is valid. Lady Tsunade has stated that the village is in a tense and critical period. As members of the village, you must make sacrifices and contributions. Take everything. With that, the captain shoved Sarutobi Kaisho aside and signaled his men. The Anbu produced several sealing scrolls, packed the convoy's hard-won ninja tools and supplies into them, and withdrew without hesitation, leaving the Sarutobi clan members standing stunned. Was this outright robbery? The equipment they had struggled to acquire, taken just like that, sacrifice and contribution? How much had they lost? There were many onlookers at the gate, all curious why the Anbu had seized the convoy's supplies. Could something be wrong with the convoy? Move aside. Everyone, move aside. Realizing what had happened, Sarutobi Kaisho broke into a cold sweat. He couldn't comfort his clansmen. He dashed into the village, frantic. Chapter 102. I gave you a chance, but it's a pity you didn't make much progress. He didn't dare obstruct the Anbu, but Sarutobi Kaisho had to get the news to the third Hokage immediately. Only the Hokage could decide how to recover those supplies. If they were lost, the Sarutobi clan would suffer a catastrophic setback. What were the Anbu doing? Whose orders were they following? Tsunade's? A merchant caravan took a long time to travel back and forth. Every loss mattered. Kaisho didn't know that the village's situation had already shifted, or that the Anbu were not what they used to be. Even if the organization had changed, their authority to carry out operations remained. All the Sarutobi could do was watch, not daring to interfere. Hokage-sama, something terrible has happened. Sarutobi Kaisho burst into the Hokage's office without knocking. Everyone inside startled. What's going on? How undignified, storming in like that. The third Hokage's face darkened. Utatane Koharu and Homura Mitokado, seated nearby, exchanged puzzled looks. Whatever had made a Sarutobi so flustered had to be serious. Hokage-sama, Kaisho said, breathless. The clan's merchant caravan just returned to the village, but at the gate, Anbu intercepted them. They confiscated all the ninja tool supplies. They said the Sarutobi are also villagers and must make contributions and sacrifices, so the supplies must be handed over. Pfft, cuff, cuff. The third Hokage choked on his tea. Utatane's mouth dropped open. Homura's tea sprayed across the room. That slogan, wasn't it the same line used earlier when demanding puppets from Hyuga Jingyi? How had it come back to hit them? Nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. The third Hokage exploded once he recovered. He slammed his hand on his desk. He could not believe Tsunade would use the same tactic against them. They had used that argument to pressure Jingyi. Now, having endured it for a time, Tsunade had thrown the boomerang back at him. This is unacceptable. Kaisho swallowed and explained that Anbu had taken everything, claiming it was for the village and promising they'd be sent to the front lines. They said they won't take a single kunai or shuriken for themselves, he added, but his voice trembled with worry. These are the Sarutobi clan's goods. Tsunade, why did you have Anbu intercept the Sarutobi caravan and seize their supplies? The third demanded when she finally strode into the office. She pushed the door open casually, closed it behind her, walked to the sofa, sat, crossed her legs, and asked in a calm voice, Third Hokage, did you need me for something? Do you dare ask that? He barked. Why did you do this? Tsunade tilted her head as if genuinely confused. Didn't you say everything is for the village? I'm not greedy. I'll send all of it to the frontline camp. Anbu won't pocket a thing. These are Sarutobi property, the third Hokage snapped. The Sarutobi are villagers too. Being villagers doesn't mean they should be stripped of their livelihood and supplies. Tsunade, Utatane began. Don't call me that, Tsunade cut in coldly, fixing Utatane with an icy look. I don't consider you family. Your family has merchant caravans and shops too, don't they? Utane went silent. Tsunade's accusation stung. The third Hokage swayed on his feet, anger making him unsteady. He steadied himself on the desk and took a deep breath. This isn't the same as Jingi's case. You can't just... Why not? Tsunade shot back. Why can you push and I can't respond? Are you allowed to act while I'm not? She rose, voice hardening. You turned what could have been a smooth cooperation into an irreconcilable mess. You forced my hand. The third Hokage closed his eyes and inhaled slowly. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Tsunade, I apologize. This was my failure. About the puppets, I have decided to cooperate with Hyuga Jingi. The village truly needs those puppets. It's too late. I gave you a chance, and you wasted it. Tsunade kicked the sofa aside and turned away. If a tiger doesn't show its claws, she seemed to be saying, don't expect her to be harmless. Cooperation? Fine. Now she knew how to cooperate, but only after being pushed. Hiruzen, Utatane and Homura exchanged worried glances. They feared the third Hokage might become ill from the anger, or that the standoff with Tsunade would escalate and upset the village's rear lines. Dangerous while the front was still engaged and the Sand were watching for weakness. I'm fine, the third Hokage said after a moment, steadying himself. He understood Tsunade had acted out of fury and to make a point. Don't push me. He picked up his pipe and smoked to calm his nerves. When it had done its work, he set it down and addressed Kaisho and the elders. Tsunade's actions came from anger because of me, he said evenly. You don't need to worry. As long as you don't harass Hyuga Jingi further, she won't make things worse for you. What about the supplies? Kaisho asked. Let Tsunade send them to the frontline camp, the third Hokage decided. The camp needs them as a replenishment. I'll arrange the funds from the finance department to pay for the supplies directly. Utatane and Homura exchanged a look of astonishment. The third Hokage had found a neat solution. With the finances under his control, whether Tsunade kept the supplies or sent them on, the Sarutobi would receive payment in the village's name for the purchase. Prepare the inventory records, he told them. You two should go and reassure your clansmen. I need to rest. They had little choice but to leave. With this grievance diffused, Tsunade would likely cool off, and the battlefield situation remained stable, for now. The third Hokage sat alone a moment, contemplating how to mend fences and maintain cooperation with Hyuga Jingi. Chapter 103. If there is no big progress, Shizuoichi won't be optimistic about him. Since forcing him wasn't an option, they had to find a way to cooperate. The third Hokage leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and methodically reviewed every detail he knew about Jingi. The real breakthrough still depended on Tsunade. Outside, in the courtyard, two figures kept breaking apart and charging at each other again and again. Kunai rang against kunai, sending sparks scattering. They traded punches and kicks, each attack aiming for an opening. Tsunade leaned against the doorframe, while Kushina sat on a small stool at her feet, resting her head against Tsunade's leg. Tsunade ni, little yellow hair, has made so much progress, Kushina said. She remembered how, when Nawaki and Minato Namikaze first met, Nawaki could easily beat Minato. Now Minato was catching up, fast and steady, fast in pace and steady in footing. If he hadn't improved this much, would Jingi have thought so highly of him? Jingi's standards are ridiculously high. He even complains about me. Tsunade felt a flash of indignation. I taught you hand in hand, and once you grew up, you turned around and complained about me? I should have bashed him with a hammer back then. Little yellow hair. Tui! She shot Kushina an exasperated look, then watched the two sparring figures, thinking deeply. Jiraiya was still at the frontline camp recovering, while Nawaki was in the village. With his teacher away, how much could a disciple learn? And Tsunade didn't dare send Nawaki to Jiraiya's side lightly. It was too dangerous. Look at what that fool Jiraiya had been through. Even he was still recovering. If Nawaki had been with him, he would have been killed dozens of times. It was fortunate Jingi had intervened in time. Nawaki couldn't stay in the village forever. He needed experience. Minato Namikaze, younger though he was, had been progressing rapidly. He had proper instruction, suitable rivals, and a consistently steady trajectory. The key was his steadiness. At his rate, keeping him in the ninja academy would only hold him back. Some kids aren't mature yet. Even if they're strong, they need to grow gradually in the school system. Others don't need that. Mental training can be a waste of time for them. If Kakashi belonged to the first type, Minato belonged to the second. Both geniuses, but one prone to overthinking and the other naturally composed. How about sending Nawaki to the frontline camp and taking Minato along too? As long as they stayed in the camp and away from the battlefield, their safety could be managed. And with Jingi to teach them, she'd feel better. Heh, it's a draw. It's a draw. I'm exhausted. Nawaki collapsed onto the ground and tossed aside his kunai, its blade nicked in a dozen places. Minato, little yellow hair, was in no better shape. He looked worse off than Nawaki. "Nawaki, bro, little yellow hair!" Kushina called, flinging 2 water flasks over. Nawaki grinned, caught one, twisted it open, and gulped it down. "Thanks." Minato bowed politely and took a drink. "Thank you, Kushina." After a few sips, Nawaki complained, "Little yellow hair is a stupid name. Why won't you change it? Calling him Minato would be fine." Before they grew close, calling Minato that had been funny, but after they became friends, Nawaki felt it was unfair. Minato, he thought, deserved better. "Mind your own business," Minato said. Kushina trotted to Tsunade and tugged at her sleeve, daring her brother with a look. Nawaki froze. What could he do when his big sister was here? He wouldn't dare antagonize Kushina, and he didn't really want to. Besides, he couldn't be sure he could win. Don't underestimate Kushina just because she's small. Push her too far, and even Nawaki plus little yellow hair together would be crushed. Don't be ridiculous. Tsunade thumped Kushina lightly on the head. "I've told you to stop picking up all those weird things from Jingi. If Minato called you little red hair, would you like that?" "He wouldn't dare." Kushina pouted, offended on Tsunade's behalf. Minato laughed awkwardly. Kushina was right. He wouldn't dare. "Minato, have you started on the ninjutsu scroll I gave you?" Tsunade asked. "Not yet. My teacher said I should focus on building a solid foundation first. Taijutsu and swordsmanship are my basics," Minato replied earnestly. He was obedient and earnest. When Jingi told him to prioritize fundamentals, he had thrown himself into doing just that. He hadn't even opened the ninjutsu sealing scroll Nawaki had given him. He wanted to learn, but he remembered his teacher's instructions and concentrated on the basics. "Still building a foundation? How long will you keep saying that?" Nawaki scratched his head, baffled. "Sis, is Jingi planning to make Minato a taijutsu specialist?" "What? Do you look down on taijutsu ninjas?" Tsunade raised an eyebrow. A chill ran down Nawaki's spine. He broke into a flustered, fawning smile. "No way. Taijutsu ninjas are the strongest, just like you, sis." "Good answer." Tsunade looked at Nawaki with faint approval. "Don't worry about Minato's path. Jingi has already planned his training. You really don't have to think everyone's teacher is clueless." Nawaki suddenly felt a pang of envy. "Jiraiya, is that how you teach your students?" Nawaki thought. Other kids already had their futures mapped out. What about him? His teacher was still recovering at the frontline camp, and he hadn't been given a clear plan at all. Tsunade waved him off. "You two go bathe and change into clean clothes. Minato, after you eat, go home and pack. Tomorrow morning at 7, be at the village gate." "Yes." Minato didn't question why he had to pack. He simply obeyed. "What about me? What about me?" Nawaki fretted, afraid of being forgotten. Tsunade rolled her eyes. "You pack too. I'll have people escort you to the frontline camp tomorrow. You two will train under Jingi at the camp for now. That scoundrel Jiraiya is still recovering, and once he gets better, he'll be sent back to the battlefield. So stay put in the camp and behave." Training at the camp was far better than idling in the village. Tsunade wasn't worried about Minato. He was steady, obedient, sensible, did well in his lessons, and grew strong quickly. He might as well have been from another family. Nawaki, on the other hand, the more she looked at him, the more exasperated she felt. If he weren't her biological little brother, she swore she'd have beaten some sense into him. Chapter 104. I will do what Tsunade can't do. "This is great, Minato. We can go to the front lines now." Nawaki hugged Minato Namikaze with a whoop and jumped up and down. Kushina watched them, then glanced nervously at Tsunade. "Tsunade ni, what about me? I want to go too." "Get lost, stay here," Tsunade snapped, shoving Kushina's small head aside. If Kushina left the village now, the third Hokage would probably explode. Even Tsunade wasn't comfortable letting the little girl go. It was far better for her to stay and study. "Woo, why can't I go?" Kushina pouted. "Stop whining. Go change your clothes. I'll buy you barbecue later. Damn it, my pocket money." Tsunade muttered, thinking of her nearly empty wallet. Teenagers eat like there's no tomorrow. Little Yellow Hair, Kushina, and Nawaki were all in growth spurs and could clear out a pantry in a day. Barbecue prices weren't cheap either. Her money would be gone in a flash. Kushina, meanwhile, drank her juice happily. If Lord Jingi were paying, she dashed to pay him back. With Tsunade, though, Kushina preferred the older woman's wallet to stay light. That way Tsunade wouldn't be tempted to gamble at the casino. "Go drink your juice," Tsunade said through gritted teeth. She flicked Kushina's forehead in irritation. Kushina didn't grasp how dire her finances were, and Nawaki understood even less, since he was eating the most. Minato felt a little sheepish. He was freeloading. The next morning, Nawaki ran toward the village gate, certain he was early, only to find Minato Namikaze already waiting there. "Minato, how are you faster than me?" Minato smiled brightly. "I was too excited to sleep, so I got up early to prepare. Have you eaten? I made bento." They sat together eating still warm rice balls. Nawaki looked everywhere at once. "Do you think we'll go to the Land of Rain with the support troops?" "I don't know." Minato scanned the area. If the support troops were coming, they should have been long prepared. No one had shown up yet. What neither of them noticed was the shadowy arrival of 2 Anbu squads. "Nawaki? Minato Namikaze?" The boys froze. Nawaki's rice ball slipped from his fingers and fell. Minato reacted faster, fingers closing around a kunai. Who were these men? What did they want? "Phew, don't scare me. Did my sister send you?" one Anbu asked. Minato didn't know much about the Anbu, but Nawaki did. In his memory, the Anbu were always appearing around the Senju clan residence, and now that Tsunade had become Anbu commander, they showed even more. They came and went like ghosts, mysterious and unnerving. "Kids, come with us." The Anbu leader didn't bother with small talk. He motioned, and instead of using the main gate, they slipped out through the Anbu's private passage. They ran without speaking. The only pauses were to catch their breath. The 2 youngsters had no choice but to keep up. "Captain, are you sure this is okay? Those 2 children can't keep up," one Anbu murmured. "If you have a problem, take it up with the commander." "That's an order," the leader replied. "It was the commander's order, then. Fine. Just run and don't collapse." The Anbu drove them hard, exactly as Tsunade intended. Nawaki had begged to go to the battlefield. Tsunade thought a rough march would temper his idea of war. If he didn't suffer a bit, he'd treat the front like a playground. Wear him out now so he wouldn't be spoiled later. Maybe he'd come back half dead and finally learn humility. She'd sent him to Jiraiya to learn properly, not to be another Jiraiya. By the time the 2 boys reached the camp, they looked like they'd been through a ringer. Legs shaking, faces drained of color. All the excitement from leaving the village had evaporated. "Lord Jingi, these are the ninja tools and supplies Tsunade ordered us to deliver." The Anbu set several sealing scrolls on the table. Tsunade had seized the Sarutobi clan's supplies and couldn't keep them in the village, so she'd had the Anbu deliver them, and incidentally sent the 2 kids along. Kushina alone was enough to worry about. The extra 2 she could hand off. "You did well." Lord Jingi put the scrolls away and looked up at the squad leader. "Return to the village and tell Tsunade things at the camp are normal. As for this batch of supplies, I'll release them as needed." Seizing the Sarutobi clan's supplies was effectively a slap in the 3rd Hokage's face, but the 3rd was not an ordinary man. He could always reimburse the Sarutobi for the supplies with funds from procurement, because he trusted Tsunade wouldn't hoard or embezzle them. The important thing in his eyes was that the supplies reached the front. Lord Jingi, however, thought, "What if I hold them back? Aren't you in charge of the treasury? Spend the money and never see the goods. Let's see who gets anxious first." What Lord Jingi couldn't bring himself to do, Tsunade would. And what Tsunade hesitated on, Lord Jingi might do. They balanced each other in their own way. Yes, the Anbu had delivered both supplies and people. Their mission was complete. They rested briefly, then returned to the village. Lord Jingi would not free this batch of supplies prematurely. He'd wait and see the reactions of the F4. When the Anbu left, Lord Jingi stowed the sealing scrolls and looked at the 2 shivering kids. "Tsk, you both look miserable." They hadn't even been given raincoats for the march. The Anbu wouldn't have thought to provide those. The boys stood there soaked and exhausted, barely able to hold themselves upright. "Jingi?" Nawaki forced what passed for a smile, more like a grimace. Sensei? Minato gritted his teeth and tried to straighten up, but his legs trembled uncontrollably. Lord Jingi took 2 cups, filled them with water, and set them on the table, then sat back to observe the pair. Chapter 1-5. Want to go to the battlefield? First, learn the cruelty of war. Tsunade sent word. She said you two were eager to go to the battlefield, right? No, I wasn't. Minato Namikaze felt a chill run down his spine at the smile on his teacher's face and shook his head so hard it looked like he might topple over. It's Nawaki, not me. Weren't we supposed to go together? Nawaki's eyes widened. You just met your teacher and you're already selling me out? Jingi watched the 2 boys argue with obvious amusement. All right, that's enough. Stop glaring at each other. Neither of you are behaving. Drink this hot water and go sleep next door. Tomorrow, I'll assign some missions. If you stick with them, I'll let you go to the battlefield. Really? Nawaki stopped fussing with the quilt and stared at Jingi as if the world had suddenly opened up. Minato kept his head bowed and said nothing. Really? Jingi grinned, displaying 2 rows of teeth. More real than pearls. Nawaki collapsed back on the quilt, gulped down the hot water, and darted next door. Minato sipped his own tea, bowed to Jingi, and followed. Both boys needed rest, but from the way Jingi had phrased it, the missions waiting for them were unlikely to be easy. After a while, Jiraiya, who had received word, hurried up to the lounge. Shoes! Jingi pointed to the entrance. Jiraiya, about to step in, gave an embarrassed smile and backed out. He never used umbrellas or raincoats and often came in dripping, tracking water over the floors. Jingi had banned him from doing that. If you want to come in, change into dry shoes and clothes. Otherwise, stay at the door. Nawaki and Minato are sleeping next door, Jingi added when Jiraiya hesitated. They ran all the way with the Anbu and are still trembling. Let them rest. Don't disturb them. Has your mission come down? Jiraiya asked. After their ambush by the Rain Village had wiped out the elite troops, Nara Shikaku had no stomach for forming another centralized elite unit. Even figures like Jiraiya and his comrades were split up now, each leading a small squad into the battlefield. Orochimaru and Sakumo Hatake had already gone ahead. Jiraiya, badly wounded, was still in camp but would likely be deployed soon. It has, Jingi said. Jiraiya laughed. I wanted to see Nawaki. I hope you'll keep him safe in the camp instead of dragging him onto the battlefield. The battlefield was too dangerous. Jiraiya faced that danger every day. He couldn't guarantee the safety of a child. Tsunade had appointed him Nawaki's teacher, not a guardian to lead him to his death. On that point, Jiraiya was more cautious than Orochimaru. Jingi set his book down and walked outside, looking up at the overcast sky. You're conscientious. I told Tsunade you'd make a good teacher, and that's why she entrusted Nawaki to you. Ha! That proves I'm better than that arrogant Orochimaru, Jiraiya crowed, pleased with himself for having stolen a promising pupil. Jingi only flicked his sleeve and returned to the lounge. Don't worry, I'll take Nawaki with me for now and give him some tasks to toughen him up. If he proves himself, the battlefield won't be out of reach. You're serious? Jiraiya leaned in, incredulous. But what if they run into danger? I'll lead the team myself. Jingi tapped his chest. Do you really doubt me? All right. You're amazing. I hope Nawaki completes whatever you give him and then gets to go. There wasn't much Jiraiya could say after that. If Jingi was going to take charge for a while, Jiraiya would trust him to guide the boy and step in when he had time. Jiraiya left with his squad, heading for the battlefield, without waiting to say goodbye. After a day's rest, Nawaki and Minato were bristling with energy. If you ignored the way they still trembled when they stood, they were eager to go. Early the next morning, the 2 boys were waiting outside Jingi's door like little sentries. When Jingi entered the operating room, they stood there with wide eyes. You 2 are something else, Jingi said. So eager for missions, are you? All right, but don't say I didn't warn you. Shiro, take these 2 to the storeroom and have them help move things, Jingi ordered one of the duty ninja. Storeroom? Shiro looked puzzled. One of the boys was Tsunade's brother, and the other was Jingi's disciple. Was it appropriate to send them to the storeroom to move things? That wasn't exactly a job for kids. The storeroom in the medical department was a euphemism everyone used. Its proper name was the morgue. Helping to move things there could mean handling bodies, sometimes even stitching them. Enemy corpses could be in pieces, but their own comrades' bodies needed to be tidied and placed carefully into sealing scrolls. Exactly, the storeroom. Let them really experience the cruelty of war, Jingi said without flinching. Teenage recruits fresh from the academy didn't grasp what war truly meant. They'd never felt wind or rain or real hardship. Jingi wanted to give them a taste of it before they set foot on the battlefield. Shiro gave a sympathetic look to the boys. "You two brats, follow me." Neither understood fully, but both were impressed and followed, their legs still unsteady. The morgue wasn't far. A few minutes later they arrived. "Old man, I brought you two laborers," Shiro called as they entered. The morgue was sparsely staffed. The man in charge was known as Old Ghost, a nickname born from years spent working with the dead and the taciturn manner that made others say he carried a heavy, morbid aura. He stood there wearing a surgical mask and a raincoat and looked at the two children with clear confusion. He glanced at Shiro. "Sending children to the morgue now?" This camp had its own peculiar way of teaching. Chapter 106. As long as it's war, there will be no immortals. Cough. Shiro leaned toward the old veteran and murmured, "The black-haired boy is Tsunade Hime's younger brother and one of Jiraiya's students. The blonde is Lord Jingi's disciple. Both of them begged to be sent to the battlefield, so Lord Jingi had them brought here to learn the cruelty of war." "Do they need special care?" the old man asked with few words. He drew out a cigarette, struck a light, and inhaled slowly. Hiss. When he pulled off his mask, Nawaki and the blonde boy froze. The man's face was a ruin of scars. He looked at them with unreadable eyes. The lines on his cheeks twitched once. "Of course they need care," he said flatly. "This was Lord Jingi's order. I'm entrusting them to you. See that it's done." Shiro finished his whispered explanation and slipped away. He didn't like being around the old man. There was something about him that put people on edge. The old veteran took 2 deep drags and tossed his half-smoked cigarette to the ground. He shrugged 2 raincoats, clearly not a perfect fit, toward the boys. They hesitated, but then obediently put them on. He led them into a windowless room. "Open the bag." Nawaki's hand moved on its own, fumbling at the zipper. When the bag split open, he froze. A pale face, a deep gash across it, deathly still, stared up at him. Nawaki jumped back on instinct, pointing a shaking finger. This. The blonde boy's eyes went wide. The old man said, matter-of-factly, "These are heroes of the village. Some are lucky enough to have their bodies brought home. The unlucky ones stay here on the battlefield." He stepped forward, unzipped the body bag to confirm nothing was missing, then picked up a few simple tools and began to stitch the wounds. His hands moved with practiced, clinical efficiency. Nawaki and the blonde both swallowed hard, their faces drained of color. Their legs trembled. The sight of a fellow shinobi, stitched like this, was brutal. When the man finished, he zipped the bag back up, set the blood-slick instruments down, and looked at them. "Your task is to inspect the bodies, stitch any wounds, and move them to the room on the other side." The reaction was immediate. Nawaki retched first. The blonde followed. Neither had expected the assignment Jingi had in mind. If the point was to teach them the cruelty of war, it had worked too well. There were only their own people in this room. If they had to examine enemy corpses as well, who knew what they might see? "Finish up," the old man ordered once they'd stopped dry heaving. "You're here to work. No slacking." They did as told. When they were done, the man stepped out of the makeshift operating area, peeled off his gloves, and tossed them into the trash. Turning, he asked Shiro, who had stayed nearby, "Do you think those 2 boys can handle what I've given them?" Shiro's mouth twisted in an odd half-smile. "Maybe. When I was their age, I was so frightened at the sight of a corpse I couldn't move." Entrusting 2 children with sorting and moving bodies to experience war was a harsh lesson, cruel perhaps. Jingi didn't deny it, but compared to actually standing on the battlefield and fighting, this was the smallest cruelty of all. By the end of the day, Nawaki and the blonde wandered into the restroom like ghosts. Their eyes were empty and pale. Jingi set prepared bowls on the table and asked with a small, weary laugh, "Do you two still envy those who get to go to the battlefield?" Nawaki blinked and looked at the meat on the plates. Suddenly his stomach lurched. He bolted for the door. Ugh! The blonde didn't run, but his face went even whiter at the sight of the food. For a while, neither of them would have the appetite for meat. Jingi folded his hands and said flatly, "Eat. This is a basic lesson for any ninja. Nobody gets out of it." "Yes," the blonde managed. He forced himself to pick up his bowl and chopsticks and tried to focus on the routine. The images from the day kept stabbing at him, but he tried to steady himself. Jingi watched his student begin to eat with a small, approving nod. The blonde was young, but he had decent psychological resilience. Nawaki was harder to read. Nawaki vomited again. Once he'd emptied everything that could be emptied, he forced himself back, acting as if nothing had happened. He grabbed his bowl and began to shovel food into his mouth in big, desperate bites. The blonde followed his lead, eating large mouthfuls and occasionally rolling his eyes from stress. Neither of them had expected a simple meal to feel as hard as any battlefield. After the meal, the blonde jumped up to wash the dishes, needing something to do to keep his mind busy. Nawaki sat with a book and a cup of tea, fighting the nausea that still clung to him. "Yes," Jingi said when the boys asked about the casualties. "Many died. You can drop the did. As long as there's a war, many people will die. The land of rain has turned into a living hell." He flipped through a medical record, then set it down and leaned back, folding his hands. "Do you want to know why this war started in the land of rain?" "Yes," the blonde answered promptly. He felt a deep pity for the people of the rain. Jingi tossed a stick onto the brazier and let the flames lick it before he spoke. "It's a matter of conflict between nations and between villages. The land of rain wasn't to blame in itself, but it was caught in the middle." He gestured for them to sit closer, feeling this was a lesson they needed. The blonde wiped his hands and obeyed. Nawaki shuffled nearer as well. The immediate cause was the Sand Village's repeated provocations toward the village, Jingi said. Faced with those provocations, the village had to respond, which meant sending forces into the land of rain. Nawaki raised his hand. "Why did they have to go into the land of rain?" he asked. "I remember Tsunade saying the Sand Village provoked the village in the land of rivers. Why did our forces go into the rain instead of the rivers?" Chapter 107, Listening to Your Words. My mind is in a mess. A good question. Jingi snapped his fingers. Because the Rain Village is also getting restless. After the First Ninja World War, the participating villages were recovering. The Rain Village took advantage of that. Its leader, Hanzu of the Salamander, is powerful and ambitious. He wants to turn the 5 great shinobi countries into 6. The leader of the Rain Village wants to become the Rain Kage? Nawaki blurted. Exactly. Jingi nodded. Hanzo had the strength and the ambition, and the daimyo of the Land of Rain was willing to back the village's development. So the Rain Village seized the chance and grew quickly, at one point becoming the strongest ninja village outside the 5 great nations. The Rain Village's growth would threaten the interests of the 5 great shinobi countries. They wouldn't allow that. Instead of attacking the Land of Rivers, our village decided to send people into the Land of Rain to drag the Rain Village into the war. Once conflict breaks out, the Land of Rain becomes a battlefield, and the Rain Village has no choice but to be involved. Hearing this theory for the first time, Nawaki and Minato were stunned. A huge wave of realization hit them. Nawaki struggled to accept it. Do we really have to drag the Rain Village into this? Yes, we must. Jingi was firm. Whoever becomes Hokage will choose the same. If the Rain Village keeps developing, it will encroach on the resources and interests of the other villages, and the 5 great shinobi countries won't tolerate that. Even if we don't force them into war now, if the Rain Village grows stronger later, they'll become our enemies. Why? Nawaki protested, hopeful. Can't we all develop peacefully? Why must there be war? Those who haven't faced harsh reality sound naive. Yes, in theory, Jingi said with a short laugh. Konoha prefers peaceful growth. The Land of Fire is rich, and we don't need to seize others' resources to develop steadily. But have you considered that not every nation can do that? Take the Sand Village. Why would the Sand Village provoke us? Nawaki asked, puzzled. Jingi drew an invisible circle in the air. Their country's resources are poor. Their development has stalled. If they stick to peaceful growth, they remain trapped in this circle while Konoha grows stronger. War is what can break that cycle. With conflict, the Sand Village can seize the Land of Fire's resources and develop. That's a core reason wars break out. The Sand Village is watching us. Iwagakure is the same. Even the seemingly innocent Rain Village is no exception. Now, do you still think the Rain Village is innocent? The two fell silent. From a human perspective, the Rain Village, and even the Land of Rain, looked pitiful. From the village's strategic view, innocence didn't matter. Danger had to be contained. So remember one thing: don't pity your enemies. Don't let sympathy make you weak. When you feel sorry for others, think of the bodies in the morgue. Those were once our comrades, fell on the battlefield for the village. Their sacrifice lets our people live in peace. If you were ordinary civilians, I might sound cruel, but you're not. You're ninja of the village. From the moment you became shinobi, you give up the right to be soft-hearted. Jingi cut off his talk at the right moment, stood up, and clapped his hands. Keep what I said in your hearts. That's all for today. Go rest. We don't tolerate idlers in camp. Strength matters, and so do correct values. You must take a firm stance. Listening to him, Nawaki and Minato felt their minds in a whirl. Jingi's words had muddled them, but they also eased the lingering shock from working in the morgue. Their thoughts were too chaotic to dwell on those terrifying scenes. Jingi's lecture steadied them enough to sleep through the night. The next morning, Jingi dragged them out of bed, fed them breakfast, and then sent them back to the morgue. On the second day of work, though their stomachs still turned and their hands shook, Nawaki and Minato could hold on. That was progress. Jingi's methods were harsh, but rapid growth was better than dying on the battlefield. He didn't dare risk sending Nawaki out to test whether the exploding tag curse might trigger. For safety, it was better to keep him in camp for training. People grow fast in extreme conditions. On the first day, they vomited until they were dizzy. On the second day, they forced themselves not to. By the third day, the reactions had waned. By the fourth, they were already getting used to it. They kept at it for half a month before Jingi called a halt. After breakfast, the two got up automatically, ready to go back to the morgue, but Jingi raised a hand to stop them. From today on, you don't have to go to the morgue. Change your clothes. You'll be helping in the medical room. Ah? We're done with the morgue? Nawaki brightened. If you think they won't be disappointed, Old Ghost will be very unhappy, Jingi said. Go to hell. Jingi immediately slapped Nawaki's head. Stay away from that guy. Crawling out of a pile of corpses did something to his mind. That's why he's been working in the morgue non-stop. I sent you there for training, not to pick up his madness. Ouch! Nawaki clutched his head and sank to the ground. Minato, who'd been listening quietly, took 2 steps back, thankful he hadn't said anything that would earn him a slap. Nawaki rubbed his forehead and asked, curious, Jingi, why is Old Ghost like that? Because he went through severe psychological trauma. Think of it as a very bad shock to his mind. Jingi set down his chopsticks and motioned for Nawaki to wash the dishes. His turn that day. Nawaki started, then slapped his own mouth. Jingi chuckled. You're right, but be respectful. He's a senior. Don't speak carelessly. Nawaki and Minato's morgue duty ended. They were assigned to help in the medical room. The work wasn't as visually horrifying, but it was no less emotionally taxing. Chapter 108, It's Lucky to Come Back Alive from the Battlefield. The morgue was full of dead bodies, but the medical room teemed with wounded soldiers brought back from the battlefield. The second lesson in the cruelty of war would unfold here. After preparing, the 2 youngsters followed Lord Jingi as he walked through the wards. They saw many injuries. Some patients were relatively intact. Others had lost hands or feet. Quick, get Lord Jingi. Take the patient to the operating room. Hurry. The medical room was one of the busiest places in the camp. Whenever wounded men arrived, the place lost any chance of quiet. Ah, my hand, cried a man whose right hand was nearly severed, held on by only a strip of flesh. Blood flowed across the floor as he was brought into the operating room. Nawaki and Minato Namikaze trailed behind Lord Jingi, looking helpless. Quiet, Lord Jingi said calmly. He tapped the injured man's head. The man rolled his eyes and went unconscious. With steady hands, Lord Jingi cut the nerves in the arm to numb it, controlled the bleeding, and inspected the wound for toxins. Satisfied there were none, He cleaned the almost severed limb and surgically reattached it. Then he used medical ninjutsu to accelerate the healing. When the wound had recovered enough, he set a splint, reconnected the severed nerves, and had the nurses send the man back to the ward. As he pulled off his gloves, Lord Jingi heard the two of them swallowing. He glanced back to find Nawaki and Minato standing at the doorway, wide-eyed and nervous. The operating room's blood had a stronger impact than the morgue because these were living people, people who might recover. After washing his hands, Lord Jingi led the two out. That man was lucky, he told them. He was brought back in time and the arm wasn't completely severed. With surgery and recovery, he'll pull through. And what about those in the ward who've lost hands or feet? Nawaki asked. Medical ninjutsu has advanced quickly, Lord Jingi said as he wiped his hands with a towel. With a skilled medical ninja, many operations that were once impossible are now routine. But surviving a battlefield injury is already fortunate. Many with missing limbs could be treated, but the severed parts weren't brought back. Some who drag themselves back are beyond saving and end up needing amputations. He looked at them seriously. The medical room is meant to save lives, but the psychological toll here is as heavy as in the morgue. You two must observe carefully and truly experience it. Sometimes coming back with a broken arm is already a blessing. Those with severe wounds who are also poisoned, those are the worst off. Nawaki instinctively hunched his shoulders. He had seen poisoned patients in the ward. The scenes were gruesome, even more terrifying than missing limbs. The morgue held many who had died of poisoning, and those corpses were especially harrowing. Nawaki kept nudging Minato with his elbow, trying to get him to speak up. Minato, whom everyone called Little Yellow Hair, looked helpless and finally asked, "Teacher, aren't we going to train?" "Of course," Lord Jingi said. "Putting you to work in the morgue and assisting in the medical room is meant to temper your character. But training cannot be abandoned. I'll start arranging formal lessons tomorrow." He couldn't bring himself to leave his apprentices without guidance while he was on patrol. Little Yellow Hair already had a solid foundation. With proper instruction, his potential was limitless. Nawaki, for all his energy, would do fine alongside him. The promise made both boys light up. "Great!" Nawaki cheered, and the two of them scattered through the medical room, helping wherever needed. The next morning, after preparing breakfast, Lord Jingi pulled Nawaki and Little Yellow Hair out of bed. "It's dawn already?" Little Yellow Hair sprang up. Nawaki yawned and rubbed his eyes, wanting a few more minutes, but Lord Jingi gave him no slack. 2 minutes. Come eat, then start training. No waiting if you're late." "Coming." Nawaki shot out of bed at the word breakfast, hurriedly dressing as he ran. The three of them, one adult and 2 boys, squatted at the entrance to the lounge with large bowls, slurping noodles. Nawaki, mouth full, asked between bites, "Lord Jingi, why do we have to squat at the door to eat?" "Because it tastes better that way," Lord Jingi replied. Nawaki frowned in disbelief but finished his meal. Once they were done, he looked at Lord Jingi expectantly, hoping the teacher wouldn't favor Little Yellow Hair over him. Lord Jingi waved him off. "How many water release ninjutsu do you know?" Nawaki's eyes lit up. This was his specialty. He began to list techniques, but Lord Jingi cut him off. "Enough. You don't need to say them all. Your training will be simple. Pick one water release technique and use it constantly, trying to compress its form and power. That's it." Nawaki's Senju heritage showed strongly. He possessed both water and earth release chakra, knew many water techniques, and had more chakra than most. That made training him straightforward. Lord Jingi intended to focus Nawaki on water release, taijutsu, and the body flicker technique. If Nawaki could master a compressed water release jutsu combined with fast body movement and strong hand-to-hand combat, he could become a powerful fighter, a weaker incarnation of Senju Tobirama, perhaps. With that template, there was no need to force broader training just yet. Chapter 109. To deal with a naughty kid, you have to beat him up. Little Yellow Hair's template was Senju Tobirama. He had the potential for the Flying Thunder God technique. But compared to Nawaki, Little Yellow Hair's template was a lot more troublesome. To learn the Flying Thunder God technique, you need an affinity with the space element, mastery of sealing jutsu, and incredibly fast neural reflexes. Those were all necessary conditions. Was it really that simple? Nawaki, skilled in water release, actually didn't much like water ninjutsu. He preferred the cool, piercing power of lightning release. Idiot! Jingi's vein bulged on his forehead. He slapped Nawaki hard. Your great-uncle's water release terrified countless enemies, and you look down on it? Is it really that powerful? Nawaki asked cautiously. All he knew about his grandfather and great-uncle came from his sister and grandmother. Their true stature was beyond him. Jinji rubbed his temples, annoyed, then threw a kunai that stuck into a tree trunk dozens of meters away. Use water bullet technique on that trunk. I can do that. Nawaki puffed up a little and formed the hand seals. Water release. Water bullet technique. A water pillar, the thickness of a baby's arm, shot from Nawaki's mouth and struck the tree trunk. It washed away a piece of bark and caused the stuck kunai to shift slightly. Minato Namikaze watched with widening eyes. How was it? Nawaki turned, expectant. Sigh. Jingi slapped his forehead. Promise me you'll never call Senju Tobirama your great-uncle again. Nawaki blinked. What? Watch carefully. Jingi pushed Nawaki's head back and formed the seals himself. It was the same jutsu, the same method, except Jingi didn't expel as much water. A pillar the thickness of a pinky shot toward the trunk, moving far faster than Nawaki's had. Puff. The trunk was pierced clean through, a neat hole driven where the small pillar struck. This was absurd. Nawaki and Little Yellow Hair both gaped. A water column no thicker than a finger, and it tore through a tree? If that hit a person, it would make a bloody hole. Humans weren't as tough as trees. You see now? Jingi snapped. Your great-uncle's water release made enemies tremble because he could compress his jutsu. The same water release, when compressed, hits far harder and uses less chakra. To be frank, even his spit had more force than your thrown kunai. Nawaki's face flushed red with shame. Train hard, master water nature chakra transformation. I believe you can do it. Jingi softened for a moment, but then turned to Little Yellow Hair. Your training is still about building a foundation. Your path is different from Nawaki's. Don't envy him for learning lots of jutsu. Those don't matter as much for you. Once you follow the path I've set, you can learn all the jutsu you want. Jingi's disciple nodded quickly. Yes, sensei. Little Yellow Hair was obedient. Whatever Jingi said, he did. Even in the heavy rain, he trained diligently, strengthening his basics. Minato worked hard on his foundation too, tireless and unfazed by boredom. Nawaki, though, struggled. He wanted to run before he could walk. Jingi, if I master water nature chakra transformation, I can compress jutsu, right? Nawaki asked. Ouch! Why'd you hit me? Jingi feigned pain. Nothing. My hand was itchy. Unconvinced? Then hit me back. Ah, you're still hitting me. Train or I'll keep hitting you, Jingi warned. Mastering water nature was easy for Jingi, but Nawaki found it tricky. He still had a long way to go. Nara Shikaku strolled over with a smile, carrying an iron rod, and handed it to Jingi. I just happened to be passing. Isn't that a bit much for a child? Jingi weighed the rod in his hand and smiled. It's fine. Mischievous kids need a beating. Right, Nawaki? The boy shivered in the rain and trained even harder, afraid of the rod. Others might hesitate to strike someone of Nawaki's status, but Jingi hit him without flinching. After all, Tsunade had entrusted Nawaki to him. Idiot! Master the rhythm. How can you mess up even a water bullet? Jingi barked. No way. Someone can't even do a water bullet properly. Nara Shikaku muttered, speechless at Jingi's harshness. To be fair, Nawaki was decent for his age, but Jingi treated him as if he were hopeless. Watching the two training in the rain, Nara wondered if he should bring his own son over, then thought better of it, picturing his kid being thrashed by Jingi. Rhythm. On the battlefield, enemies will try to break your timing. You need to keep the rhythm in your own hands. Nawaki was so berated he began to doubt his life choices. Little Yellow Hair kept his head down and trained without slackening, afraid of Jingi's scolding. When the mentor could bear it no longer, he swatted Nawaki's backside. Nawaki shot up several meters with a yelp, clutching his rear. The howl stopped as soon as Jingi raised his hand, and Nawaki resumed training. He had wanted this yesterday. Today, he wished he'd stayed in the village. Even hard labor at the morgue would have been preferable. His already sore pride turned to green regret. After the punishment, Jingi tilted his head and asked Nara Shikaku, Senior, did you need something from me? Cough, cough. Nara Shikaku's expression was awkward. It's just that Tsunade Hime recently impounded a batch of supplies. These supplies aren't related to the camp, are they? Jingi asked. Indeed, they are not related, Shikaku admitted with a bitter smile. But the Hokage-sama already allocated funds to purchase them, and they were delivered to you. So, I see. Just as Shikaku assumed Jingi would hand the supplies over, Jingi suddenly raised a hand and beckoned him. Shikaku blinked in confusion. Where's the money? Jingi demanded. If you bought the supplies, bring the money. No, the money has already been given to the Sarutobi clan, Shikaku hurriedly explained. Then ask the Sarutobi clan for the supplies. Why are you asking me? The supplies I have were sent by Tsunade. You can't stall your way out of this. Jingi's voice was flat. No money? Shikaku's face flushed. Jingi clicked his tongue. No money? Then why do you want supplies? Apply to Hokage-sama. If the village spent the funds to buy ninja tools and supplies from the Sarutobi clan, the supplies should come from them. Why drag me into it? The supplies in my hands were sent by Tsunade and, since they were impounded, have nothing to do with the Sarutobi clan. Senior, Jingi continued, for matters like this, it's enough for us to be messengers. Don't meddle in other people's business. Tsunade and Hokage-sama will handle it. Two leaders at an impasse. Reasonable enough. Since Jingi wouldn't budge, Shikaku had no choice but to act as a messenger. He launched into a relentless barrage of calls, urging the village to transport the supplies as quickly as possible. As for the third Hokage's side, leave it to Tsunade. I'm not trying to speak for the Hokage, he said defensively. I'm just worried this will affect the war. Even though he'd aligned himself with Tsunade, Nara Shikaku still wanted the village to remain stable, to cause fewer problems during the war. But the third Hokage and others had their own ways, always stirring up complications at inopportune times. If the Hokage didn't care, why should he? Will the war be affected? Probably not, at least not yet. The battle for the Land of Rain was small in scale. Even if it became chaotic, the number of shinobi from Konoha, Sunagakure, and Iwakure would be controlled. Only the Rain Village was fully mobilized. After the Rain campaign, the next phase could turn into a full-scale war between Konoha and Sunagakure. Iwagakure would likely stay out. The third Raikage and the Cloud prefer others to expend their strength. Strategically, the Rain Village could be largely ignored. Apart from Hanzo of the Salamander, the Rain Village simply didn't pose a significant threat. It won't come to that, Senior. You're overthinking, Jingi said. I hope you're right. Let's not dwell on it. I'll go back and press the Hokage to transport the supplies as soon as possible. Better safe than sorry. Supplies could never be too plentiful. You couldn't wait until you were starving to dig a latrine. In the original timeline, Konoha had made that mistake during the Second Great Ninja War. Supply shortages had driven some Konoha shinobi to prey on Rain villagers for food, and under those conditions, Nagato's parents had been killed. With the timeline of the Second Great Ninja War being accelerated here, who knew how it might change the fate of the Akatsuki's 3 children? Would Jiraiya still encounter them? Nawaki, keep training. Don't tell me you're already exhausted. Nawaki, who had wanted a short rest, stiffened, straightened up, and pushed on with his exercises. Outside a forest far from the Rain battlefield, a group of Sunagakure shinobi appeared. The leader was Chiyo. Spread out, stay alert. Don't give Iwagakure any chance to ambush us. Iwagakure loved ambushes. Konoha was a notorious example. Half an hour after Chiyo arrived, Iwakure's contingent also appeared. Kitsuchi led them, walking ahead to observe. He stopped 100 meters from Chiyo. Kitsuchi, you invited this old woman here, and now you don't even dare get closer. Are you afraid of being ambushed? Chiyo taunted. Kitsuchi didn't rise to the bait. He kept a careful eye on the trees and replied evenly, Better safe than sorry. If there were an opportunity to ambush me, I believe you, Chiyo, would take it. Chiyo laughed, a sound that grated slightly. Speak up. What do you want with this old woman? Don't tell me Iwagakure plans to cooperate with me. She remembered being rebuffed when she'd previously extended an invitation. She'd found that refusal less than satisfactory. Yes, cooperation, Kitsuchi said simply. He produced a sealing scroll and tossed it toward Chiyo. She frowned and didn't reach for it. She couldn't be sure the scroll hadn't been tampered with. One of Chiyo's escorts moved a puppet to intercept the scroll, opened it, and handed the contents up. If the scroll were trapped, only a puppet would be harmed. Kitsuchi folded his arms and watched coldly as the puppet retrieved the scroll. He had never forgiven the puppeteers after Jingi's interference had caused dozens of his puppets to explode and wiped out many of the village's elites. He disliked puppet users, and puppets in general. "Chiyo-sama, it's a sealing scroll," the escort reported after a careful inspection, then presented it to Chiyo. Chiyo unsealed it, removed the item inside, and a single loud crack echoed as a puppet, with only half a body intact, collapsed to the ground. Chiyo recognized it instantly, a puppet made from a ninja's corpse. The clothing struck a more personal chord. It looked like the uniform of a Tsunagakure shinobi. "Kitsuchi, did you bring me here to humiliate this old woman?" she snapped. Fury rose like a flame. They had called her here, tossed a sealing scroll, and inside was half a corpse, turned into a puppet, and that corpse had once been a Tsunagakure shinobi. It was provocation. Chiyo shouted, and the Tsunagakure soldiers bristled, ready to attack on her command. Kitsuchi remained calm. "You misunderstand, Chiyo. This puppet was not made by Iwagakure. It was made by Konoha." "What do you mean?" Chiyo demanded. In the ninja world, except for Tsunagakure, few villages employed corpse puppets, and even Konoha was not known for taking corpses for puppets. Were they telling her that Konoha had taken Tsunagakure bodies and turned them into puppets? She bristled at the thought. Kitsuchi answered without haste, beginning to recount events that had followed the outbreak of war. After the war began, Father devised a brilliant assassination plan aimed at Konoha. The plan went smoothly at first. Konoha didn't detect that we were preparing to act against them. Chapter 111. Jointly attack the Konoha camp? Are you crazy? You can't deny that Konoha's elite forces were wiped out, Chiyo, can you? Yes, Chiyo nodded. There wasn't much hard intelligence, but the reports were the same. Konoha's elite detachment had been ambushed by Iwagakure, and the unit they had painstakingly assembled had been annihilated. Seeing Chiyo's calm response, Kitsuchi continued. While I was leading our men to encircle and kill Orochimaru, Jiraiya, Sakumo Hatake, and the other rising geniuses from Konoha, a ninja named Hyuga Jingi, appeared. He released dozens of puppets made from corpses, sealed inside a scroll. Those puppets were incredibly strong and inflicted heavy casualties on our side. Chiyo kicked the lifeless thing at her feet. Is this puppet one of them? Yes. Kitsuchi lowered his clasped hands and went on. What's most unusual is that this Konoha ninja, Hyuga Jingi, didn't seem to control the puppets. They moved on their own. After we suffered many losses and finally destroyed the puppets, something terrifying happened. They lit up with a blue light and exploded, far more powerful than normal explosive tags. Recalling the scene, Kitsuchi wanted nothing more than to capture Jingi and flay him alive. Both Konoha and Iwagakure had a hard time assembling elite units. To lose so many to self-destructing puppets felt like an insult. Chiyo scoffed. This is impossible. Puppets don't fight without chakra threads. Even the Sans puppets need a puppeteer. How could they fight on their own, let alone self-destruct? Kitsuchi's face hardened. I thought it sounded unlikely to, which is why I came to you. If it's true, Konoha has mastered a new method of puppet creation. He had hoped Chiyo could explain the technique. If the sand had that ability, an alliance between sand and stone would make sense. But Chiyo's disbelief left him disappointed. Since he couldn't get answers from the sand, he intended to take the matter up with Konoha. Between villages, interests mattered more than grudges. Today's enemies could be tomorrow's allies, and if Konoha wouldn't cooperate, force might be necessary. Wait. Kitsuchi was about to turn away when Chiyo, finally convinced by his demeanor, stopped him. He wasn't joking or trying to humiliate her. He truly wanted to confirm what he'd seen. Are you sure these puppets really moved without being controlled? She asked. There were no chakra threads connecting them, Kitsuchi replied. Otherwise, I wouldn't have needed to come find you. Iwagakure might not have many medical ninjas, but they certainly weren't ignorant of chakra analysis. Were those huge craters on the battlefield all caused by the puppets self-destructing? Yes, Kitsuchi said plainly. Chiyo studied the corpse at her boot and thought hard. The name Jingi ticked at the back of her mind. Then it clicked. Intelligence had mentioned someone by that name replacing Tsunade to oversee the camp. That was why the face seemed familiar. Anger flashed across the old woman's features as if she wanted to rend someone apart. Kitsuchi watched her, puzzled. "Kitsuchi, I think we can cooperate," Chiyo said at last. She had long wanted to eliminate Jingi. His techniques for breaking down poisons and developing antidotes had severely diminished the San's advantage in medical ninjutsu. He was a poison to their village, always in the Konoha camp, always out of reach. She had no right to march on Konoha's camp simply to settle a personal vendetta. Now Iwagakure had come to her. "How do you propose we cooperate?" Kitsuchi asked cautiously. If anything, he was open to a one-time partnership. "Jointly attack Konoha's camp," Chiyo said. Kitsuchi blinked. For the Sand Village to strike Konoha's camp outright would be madness, but with Iwagakure at their side, they might tip the balance. The three great villages had sent roughly equal numbers to the battlefield. If two of them suddenly united against the third, the triangular balance would collapse. Kitsuchi's face went rigid. He had considered cooperation in many forms, but never expected this. "Sorry, not interested. We can discuss other forms of cooperation later." Without another word, Kitsuchi turned and withdrew with his retinue, leaving Chiyo staring after him in disbelief. Aligning to surround and kill Konoha's ninjas or cooperating on strikes against them, those were one thing. But marching on the Konoha camp itself? No. Kitsuchi wanted a stable, cautious partnership, not suicidal recklessness. From Kitsuchi's perspective, attacking Konoha's camp sounded reckless for other reasons, too. Even if they won a battle there, Konoha could simply fall back into the Land of Fire. Would they pursue them into enemy territory? And there was Hanzo of the Salamander and the Rain Village to consider. If Iwagakure left its own home vulnerable after such an attack, Hanzo or the Cloud Village might seize the opportunity to strike. Kitsuchi, an ambush commander at heart, had no desire to provoke a multi-front risk. "Kitsuchi, you'll regret this," Chiyo snarled after him. He ignored her completely. Once she proposed attacking a fellow village's camp, he had no further appetite for negotiation. Iwagakure was already drawn into the Land of Rain's war. The Cloud Village watched them greedily. Escalating matters to the point of inviting counterattacks or backstabs would be madness. Chiyo seethed as the Iwagakure contingent disappeared from sight. She had wanted Jingi gone more than anything, but Kitsuchi would not be dragged into such a dangerous gambit. Why would he? Why risk everything for the whims of one furious old woman? Chapter 112. You also have a poison needle in your crotch. Are you sure you don't need it removed? Chiyo couldn't understand why Kitsuchi had rejected her suggestion so decisively. Wouldn't it be better to launch a joint attack on the Konoha camp? Fool. He really was a fool, just like his father, Onoki. The more Chiyo thought about it, the angrier she became. Her wrinkled, age-spotted face flushed red with rage. Jingi had no idea Chiyo and Kitsuchi were plotting against him. At the moment, he was busy instructing his disciples. After dealing with Nawaki, he returned to the rest area and tossed 2 pieces of firewood into the brazier. The Land of Rain was harsh. Rain fell almost every day, and they had to keep fires burning inside, or everything would get damp. No fire meant soggy blankets at night. Leaning back in his chair with his feet propped on the desk, Jingi picked up a book. He hadn't turned 2 pages when Nawaki burst into the room, breathless. "Jingi, to the medical room. Jiraiya is hurt." "What now? Jiraiya injured again?" How many times had this happened? Jiraiya was like an unkillable cockroach, repeatedly getting banged up, coming back to camp for treatment, only to return to the battlefield and get injured all over again. Only Sakumo Hatake had worse luck. Orochimaru, by contrast, always seemed untouched. He could get ambushed and still remain in perfect condition. "Don't worry, I'll go see," Jingi said, setting the book down. Nawaki dashed after him, and the boy with the yellow hair thought for a moment before following as well. "Hiss, it hurts, big sister. Go easy on me," a voice wailed even before they reached the medical room. "Oh, isn't this the most handsome toad sage, Lord Jiraiya? How did you turn from a toad into a hedgehog?" Someone jeered. When Jingi and the others entered the medical room, they found it full of laughter. Jiraiya was lying on the operating table, his body bristling with poison needles, like a porcupine. Nawaki, who had been worried, tried to suppress a smile. Jingi moved forward, picked up a needle with forceps, and examined it. "How did you end up like this? Who did it?" he asked. "Cough, cough, don't even mention it." Jiraiya's voice was full of helpless bitterness. "I was on a mission with my team. We ran into a large sand village force. I stayed behind to cover their retreat, and they chased me." "Hiss, gently. Those poison knees, that old Grandma Chio set them. Jiraiya had the luck of the chronically unlucky. Sakumo had run into Hanzo and been pursued by the salamander. Jiraiya had blundered into a large sand force and been pursued by Chio. If it had been just Chio alone, maybe he could have fought, but she had dozens, maybe hundreds of puppets. After protecting his teammates' retreat, Jiraiya had fled for his life and ended up shot full of needles. Chio, for her part, was furious. Her plan with Kitsuchi had fallen apart, and on her way back to camp, she had happened upon Jiraiya's squad. Already boiling with anger and suddenly facing a hated enemy, she hadn't bothered with courtesy. She'd chased them down and left him like this. Jingi prepared an antidote and gave Jiraiya 2 injections, suppressing a smile. "Once you're healed, you should go find Sakumo Hatake and swear brotherhood with him. He got unlucky running into Hanzo. You ran into Chio. You both end up the same, dragging your injured self back to camp," Jingi said lightly. "Please, let's not talk about it. Just treat me." It was brutal to look at Jiraiya's body. If he hadn't run fast, those needles might well have killed him. "You should be grateful Grandma Chio hasn't developed a new kind of poison," Jingi said, and then, plucking another needle, he paused and pointed to Jiraiya's midsection. "Take off your pants." "Nani?" Jiraiya nearly jumped off the table and clutched his trousers. "You have poison needles in your crotch, too. Are you sure you don't want them pulled out?" Jingi asked, exasperated. "Pull them out." Jiraiya barked, and then, turning crimson, he did what he was told. Compared to social mortification, removing the needles was more important. An injury to that area was no joke. Jiraiya didn't want to risk his manhood. He gritted his teeth and took off his pants, lying back and closing his eyes. 10 seconds passed with no movement. Worried, he opened one eye to see Nawaki winking and several med staff watching with barely contained amusement. Jingi simply twitched the corner of his mouth. "I told you to take off your pants," he said dryly, "not your underwear too." Jiraiya's face turned as pale as the sheets. He'd heard the command and, in his panic, removed everything. Sakumo had suffered forced humiliation once, and now Jiraiya had managed to humiliate himself voluntarily. Jingi's words were ambiguous, but the result was the same. Jiraiya had been tricked by himself, if nothing else. Once all the needles were out and the antidote had time to take effect, Jiraiya bolted from the operating table and yanked his trousers up so fast half his backside was still exposed. The medical room erupted. The laughter only made Jiraiya run faster. Any man would be mortified by such a thing, especially with half your pride hanging in the air. Nawaki couldn't hide his grin, and the medics chuckled like a row of schoolchildren. Jingi watched him go and couldn't help but think, how did the palace eunuchs ever bear to give up what was theirs? If someone could surrender even that, what hope is left in life? He simply couldn't fathom it. Chapter 113. Does being a teacher cost so much money? Slow, still too slow. Speed up your reaction time. Don't just look with your eyes, perceive. In battle, perception lets you feel the enemy's moves. Compared to Nawaki's monotonous drills, Little Yellow Hair's training was harsher and infinitely more varied. Jingi held a stick, directing Minato's nerve reflex exercises. To become the yellow flash of the ninja world, learning the Flying Thunder God technique alone wasn't enough. His reflexes had to be pushed to the limit. Otherwise, teleporting toward an enemy wouldn't kill them. You might teleport into your own body or smack straight into their blade. Don't underestimate it. The Flying Thunder God technique is that dangerous. For those who met the requirements, it made them terrifying. For those who didn't, even mastering the technique could be worse than useless, which only showed how abnormal Senju Tobirama had been. His combat conditions were maxed in every respect. Put plainly, he was a prodigy who excelled in every area. If not for Senju Hashirama and Uchiha Madara overshadowing him, Tobirama's reputation would have been even greater. Hoo-hoo. Training in the pouring rain was a test of endurance and will. The downpour-soaked clothing, hampered movement, and accelerated fatigue until muscles seized. Training on mud demanded flawless footwork and precise chakra control. One wrong step, and you'd faceplant into the muck. Minato Namikaze's breath came in ragged gasps. He looked disheveled and stained with mud. Jingi had deliberately picked the muddiest spot in the camp for him to train and spar in. Nawaki watched with a flash of pity. Being Jingi's student looked downright miserable. After a moment, he decided his own ninjutsu routine wasn't so tedious after all. A little boredom beat being worked to death. "Keep going. Faster. Don't stop." Jingi swung the stick and roared. Minato, who had paused to catch his breath, jumped and moved again. The smarting on his back told him Jingi meant business. Jiraiya, too embarrassed to remain in the infirmary, watched through the scowling rain with green-eyed envy. He'd been proud to take Nawaki as his pupil, but watching Nawaki and Minato train under such relentless discipline made him just a little jealous. "Hey, this is too harsh, isn't it? Minato's still young," Jiraiya protested. He worried Jingi's severity would push Minato past his limits and leave him with long-term injuries. "Go, go, go. What do you know? Get out of here," Jingi snapped, unceremoniously shooing him away. If Jiraiya had nothing better to do, he should be supervising his own disciple instead of coming to give orders. Jingi wasn't naive about overtraining. While Nawaki's training might look monotonous, the total strain isn't that different from Minato's. You, as his teacher, should take this seriously. Ninjutsu training could damage the body. Chakra generation mattered. Teachers in the past had been stricter about pacing for a reason. Jiraiya scratched his head, hesitant. Lower his intensity? Scram! Jingi cut him off and turned toward the resting quarters. He checked the pot on the stove, poured the medicinal soup into a wooden tub, and added plenty of hot water. Jiraiya followed, curious. "You're going to make Minato soak in that?" he asked. Jingi held up 2 vials of pink medicine and tossed them into his hand. "Of course, soaking in restorative broth eases physical fatigue. Add the oral medicine and a proper massage, and Minato's body will avoid slipping into depletion." Jiraiya's jaw dropped. "You, as a teacher, really don't care at all." He stared at everything laid out, the medicinal broth, the pills, the promise of regular massages. Once, when he, Tsunade, and another had become pupils of the third Hokage, there'd been none of this pampering. They'd been trained hard and sent out. Medicated baths and tonic syrups were a new level of coddling. Why do you need all that when taking a disciple? Jiraiya muttered, half in awe, half incredulous. How about preparing a set for Nawaki, too? Jingi raised a hand and began listing costs as if it were obvious business. Medicinal soup, 50,000 ryo. Medicine, 100,000 ryo. Weekly expenses, 300,000 ryo. How much? Jiraiya nearly clutched his ears in disbelief. 300,000 ryo a week, 1 month. His head swam. That weekly total doesn't include the massages, Jingi added, wagging a finger at him with a smug smile. So do you want me to prepare a set for Nawaki? Jiraiya's face went pale. Jingi's income could comfortably cover both boys, but Nawaki was Jiraiya's pupil. As Nawaki's teacher, Jiraiya already felt guilty for not finding enough time to instruct him. Now Jingi expected him to pick up the tab. "Oh, and this kind of training will last at least 2 years, Jingi continued. So plan on paying for at least 2 years' worth of medicine and restorative soups." Jiraiya stood there like a man struck dumb. He nearly asked Tsunade if he could return Nawaki. This sort of extravagant training regimen was a world away from how they'd been taught. But Jingi's philosophy was simple. Either don't take pupils or cultivate them thoroughly, sparing no expense. He wanted to see how terrifying Minato could be if raised to such standards. "Do I really have to spend all that?" Jiraiya groaned. He had the money, yes, and he was used to throwing ryo around, but 2 years' worth of this? How many women could he impress with that in a month? His heart ached. Jingi gestured as if that were settled. "I'm willing to invest in Minato. As for you, you can refuse." "Refuse my foot," Jiraiya snapped. If Minato got this treatment and Nawaki didn't, the scandal of it would ruin him as a teacher. He didn't have time to teach Nawaki enough as it was. He couldn't also be stingy now. "Fine, spend it. Don't be polite. Match Minato's standard." Jiraiya's heart sank, but his pride as a teacher won out. Sighing, he agreed. Jiraiya would pay. Chapter 114. F4 Tiantuan prevented the army from retreating. Damn it. Being frugal in daily life had paid off, thankfully, because even when helping fallen women, Jiraiya had picked the cheap options. Otherwise, he really couldn't have afforded a disciple. Just thinking about Nawaki's monthly expenses made his heart ache, and he silently resolved not to take on any more disciples in the future. It was simply too expensive. He swallowed his medicine and then soaked in the medicinal bath. After that, Nawaki and Little Yellow Hair fell into a deep, exhausted sleep without even bothering to eat. Their chakra and bodies had been pushed to the limit. Fortunately, the medicine contained the village's latest nutrient formula, which had eased their hunger and helped them recover quickly. While they were eating, Jiraiya asked curiously, "Why didn't you go to today's meeting?" "I'm in charge of the medical room here. Other matters are Dear Heart Senpai's responsibility. Besides, what would a medical ninja who doesn't leave the camp do at those meetings?" Jingi said. At the start of the war, Jingi had more or less attended the command center's briefings. Over time, though, he stopped appearing. As he'd said, he was a medical ninja. He didn't go out to the front lines and only needed enough intel to do his job. Whether he attended meetings wasn't crucial. Nara Shikaku was extremely busy, and Jingi himself was hardly idle. He had to handle everything in the medical tent, and if a seriously wounded patient showed up, he had to take over immediately. Who had the time to sit in combat meetings? What? Is the war situation changing? Jingi paused with his chopsticks. Jiraiya nodded, helpless. The Sand Village has sent many ninja into the Land of Rivers, and they've infiltrated the Land of Fire to sever supply lines from within. I'm afraid a full-scale war is about to break out. The conflict in the Land of Rain had already dragged on for almost a year. In the original timeline, the land's war lasted about a year before Awagakure pulled back to guard against pressure from the Cloud Village, and Hanzo of the Salamander accepted defeat. What had begun as a localized clash in the Land of Rain between Konoha and the Sand Village had escalated into something much larger. According to Anbu intelligence, Cloud Village is putting a lot of pressure on Iwagakure. Iwagakure might withdraw. Once they pull out, the only parties left fighting in the Land of Rain would be our village, the Sand Village, and the Rain Village. Dear Heart Senpai thinks the Sand Village will probably withdraw soon, too. Once the fighting moves to the Land of Rivers, the scale will be incomparable to the skirmishes in the Land of Rain. It will be a full-scale war. In that case, the Land of Rain would become irrelevant, and the Sand Village would almost certainly redeploy to concentrate their forces. Compared to a full-scale war, the Land of Rain conflict had been nothing but a prelude. If the Sand Village hadn't wanted to provoke larger events, they might never have cooperated with Konoha to open hostilities there. As the fighting dragged on and reached a stalemate, a larger war became the natural outcome. Another factor was that the Sand Village wasn't gaining any advantage in the Land of Rain. Iwagakure refused to ally with them, Rain kept harassing them, and Konoha watched opportunistically from the sidelines. Without any gain, Sand would withdraw and shift their focus to the Land of Rivers. I wonder if our village will withdraw from the Land of Rain too, Jiraiya said, rubbing his belly after finishing his meal. It was a rare pleasure to have good food at the frontline camp. Probably not, Jingi replied. Don't forget that Hokage-sama and the Elder Council care a lot about prestige. Even if the Sand Village withdraws, Konoha will keep fighting until the Land of Rain shows signs of defeat. Jingi sounded amused, mocking the third Hokage and the stubborn elders who worried so much about face. Jiraiya couldn't respond too sharply. After all, the third Hokage was his teacher, even if Jingi's point made sense. He scratched his head and sighed. I hope the third Hokage and the others will be sensible enough to pull out of the Land of Rain when the Sand Village withdraws. The village shouldn't fight the Rain Village to the bitter end. Let's hope so, Jingi said. Jingi understood the actions of the F4 clearly. The course of the Land of Rain war in the original timeline spoke volumes. Iwagakure withdrew, Sand redeployed to prepare for the larger conflict, and only Konoha remained in the Land of Rain, locked in a desperate struggle with the Rain Village. The result was heavy casualties among the shinobi Konoha had sent. Rain looked victorious, but was too exhausted to carry on. Konoha was left a hollow victor. Tsunade and the others returned as Sanin without glory. In a meeting back in Konoha, Tsunade had slammed the table in anger, demanding answers from the third Hokage. Since Iwagakure is withdrawing and the Sand Village is pulling out, why are we staying stuck in the Land of Rain? What would defeating the Rain Village here gain us? Tsunade couldn't understand how, at such a time, the third Hokage and the council could insist on remaining. Once Iwagakure began moving, Nara Shikaku sent that intelligence back to the village. Anyone could see that Iwagakure intended to pull its forces back rather than waste lives in the quagmire of rain. The Sand Village's deployment to the Land of Rivers and its sabotage teams in the Land of Fire were clear signs a full-scale war was imminent. In such conditions, Konoha should withdraw. Tsunade, the Rain Village declared war on us, the third Hokage insisted. If we withdraw now, it will look like a surrender. That would damage the village's honor. Honor or not, that's nonsense, Tsunade snapped. Withdraw the forces from the Land of Rain. Those who need to recuperate should return, and those who should be transferred to the Land of Rivers should be moved. That is what we must do. In short, I absolutely disagree with letting the village remain bogged down in the Land of Rain. Dearheart Senpai also thinks we can negotiate with Hanzo of the Salamander. If we offer enough concessions, we might end the war, maybe even win the Rain Village over to our side. On the Land of Rain front, the Rain Village had been relentlessly hunting the Sand Forces, revealing deep hatred between them. If Konoha put in the effort, the chances of successful negotiations were high. With enough concessions, Rain might continue to pressure Sand on Konoha's behalf. Sacrificing some gains might be worthwhile if it ended the fighting. Tsunade, Hanzo of the Salamander cannot be trusted, Utaten Koharu said, standing with the third Hokage. Homura Mitokado nodded in agreement. Chapter 115, Who Wouldn't Want Glory So Close at Hand? Damn it, Tsunade felt a sudden cold helplessness wash over her. In the meeting, she had argued vehemently against the village remaining bogged down in the Land of Rain, but the third Hokage and the Elder Council had closed ranks. No matter how forcefully she protested, it had no effect. Akimichi Torifu was a mere figurehead now and useless as an ally. Unless she could win over the Elder Council, her objections meant nothing. The meeting was barely over before Tsunade stormed out. A late autumn wind hit her as she left the Hokage's office building, and the chill steadied the anger that had filled her. Back home, she replayed the entire meeting in her mind and decided she needed to go to the frontline camp in person. Relaying messages with puppets across half the Land of Fire was slow and imprecise. Some things had to be said face to face. She told no one of her plan. After assigning an Anbu squad to protect Kushina, she slipped out of the village with her retinue. Under her strict orders, not even the Hokage's office was notified. Tsunade planned to come and go quietly. She hadn't told Nara Shikaku, and once she reached the Land of Rain, she sent a puppet message to Jingyi. When he received it, Jingyi dressed and left the camp under cover of night. At a hidden cave near the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Rain, Jingyi signaled to the Anbu hidden in the shadows, shrugged off his raincoat, and stepped inside. The cave held a single oil lamp, and nobody had bothered to light a fire. He left his coat at the entrance and entered, complaining. Why no fire? It's freezing out there. Might even start sleet. Jingyi had a strange affinity for the Land of Rain. In the 2+ years since his transmigration, he'd spent 2 full years living here. Tsunade handed him the cotton clothes she'd brought. I told you I didn't want anyone to know I left the village to come find you, she said. All right. He took the clothes, slipped them on, and then walked up and hugged her. Have you put on weight? Get lost, she snapped. Tsunade was inwardly bewildered. As a child, she had wished her chest would grow faster so she could stop Jiraiya's teasing about being flat-chested. Now it had grown, too much in her eyes, making movement awkward and drawing attention. Jingyi didn't press the joke further. He sat on a clean rock and turned to the real matter. You came about the war? Yes. At the word, Tsunade's temper flared and her delicate face hardened. The third Hokage and those 2 elders are stubbornly refusing to withdraw from the Land of Rain. My lone voice of opposition is useless. It's maddening. Then let them fight, Jingyi said bluntly. Tsunade stared at him. He meant what? Don't oppose? Let Konoha keep fighting the rain? She frowned. Her opposition aimed to get the village out early, to limit losses and reallocate strength to the land of rivers. Otherwise, Jingi shoved his hands into the pockets of the cotton clothes and spoke calmly. You and I believe the village should invest its power here at the land of rivers, but others think differently. They'll argue that once Iwagakure and Sun withdraw, Konoha can easily crush the Rain Village. Why give up a victory you can reach with your own hands? Who wouldn't want the glory that's within reach? Tsunade said, the words bitter. But she had a dozen counter-arguments, but they sounded thin and helpless the more she thought about them. Yes, who wouldn't chase glory if it was almost theirs? The thirst for honor is human, and the third Hokage was only human. He wouldn't easily turn down such an opportunity. The shame was that this glory wasn't guaranteed. The Rain Village could be fragile, but Hanzo of the Salamander was no pushover. Taking victory from him without paying a price would be very difficult. Then opposing them is pointless. Jingi continued. If they want glory, let them have it. Our job is to make sure we don't get dragged under. I'll promise you victory where it matters to us. That's what I care about. He reached out and pulled Tsunade into his arms. The third didn't care how many died for glory, and Jingi was curious to see what would happen when that hunger for honor met real disaster. That glory would sting them badly if things went wrong. Leaning on his shoulder, Tsunade sighed. All right, I'll follow your plan. If they want glory, let them chase it. Good. You focus on what you have to do. The Anbu must be replenished. Your losses have been heavy. Recruit carefully. Replace the veterans gradually. Doing their part was what mattered. Jingi ran the camp's medical room. Tsunade's role was to deepen her control over the Anbu. As for the grand political maneuvers, those belonged to others. If the war went well, the third Hokage would claim most of the credit. If it went badly, it wouldn't be their responsibility alone. I will, Tsunade promised. She rested her head on his shoulder for a moment, then snatched his hand away with an exasperated glare. Don't even think about where your hands are. There are Anbu guarding outside. Jingi only grinned. Tsunade flushed, annoyed enough to want to punch him. Seeing you like this makes me angry. I need to go back to the village. I don't want anyone to know I slipped out. Take care, he said. They both knew there was no time for distractions. Tsunade would return to the village. He would return to the camp. The war lines were shifting. As expected, pressure from the Cloud Ninja village on Iwagakure had increased. Onoki could no longer afford to be entangled in the chaos of the Land of Rain and ordered all Iwagakure forces to withdraw back to the Land of Earth. Iwagakure's retreat became a signal. Once they pulled out, the Sand Village followed. Chiyo resisted, but circumstances forced the Sand to withdraw as well. While Iwagakure still stood in the field, they had been able to relieve some of the pressure on the Sand. That messy free-for-all had been a kind of balance of blows, but with Iwagakure gone, that balance shifted. Chapter 116, The Consequences of Konoha F4's Stubbornness. Iwagakure had withdrawn. Konoha and the Rain were both in pursuit of Tsunagakure, and the pressure on every front suddenly spiked. Losses soared. Sand would not continue to mire itself in the quagmire of the Land of Rain, so it decisively fell back, concentrating its main forces in the Land of Rivers. Their withdrawal from Rain, however, did not mean the fighting was over. On the contrary, a full-scale war between Konoha and Tsunagakure had erupted in Rivers, while the fighting in Rain was now essentially only between Konoha and the Rain, a chaotic free-for-all reduced to a two-way slaughter. Bad news arrived, one after another. In the command center, Jingi and Nara Shikaku sat together, sipping hot tea. Shikaku massaged his temples and said with a weary grin, I'm glad we listened to you and had the village send extra supplies earlier. If we hadn't, the camp would have run out of everything by now. Tsunagakure had thrown everything at the conflict. Elite squads infiltrated the Land of Fire to wreak havoc and sever Konoha's supply lines to the camp. Konoha had been prepared to an extent, but nobody expected Tsunagakure to be so ruthless. For a while, every supply route was cut. Those elite units left a trail of destruction through the Land of Fire. The third Hokage was tearing at his beard in frustration, constantly ordering forces to encircle and annihilate the infiltrators. To clear the threats as quickly as possible, even the frontline camp had pulled people out. Sakumo Hatake was one of those reassigned. Whether that would lead to the same tragic events as in the original timeline was anyone's guess. Better safe than sorry, Shikaku muttered. With Iwagakure and Tsunagakure out of rain, Konoha's enemy there became a weakened rain force, and the pressure on the camp eased somewhat. The inflow of the wounded diminished, and Jingi suddenly found himself with more downtime. I just hope they clear the enemies within our borders soon, he said. If not, the front lines will suffer. But despite the shifting strategic picture, the casualty numbers from Konoha continued to climb. Most of the losses weren't from blades or bullets. Ninjas were dying of poison. Hanzo of the Salamander was the culprit. Shikaku's face clouded. Jingi, is there really no way to make a targeted antidote? Jingi shook his head. No, don't even mention me. Tsunade herself would struggle with Hanzo's poison. It's not like ordinary venom. It's a toxic gas with cumulative effects. The more you inhale, the faster you rot away. Even Hanzo, the so-called demigod, needs a gas mask to handle it. Developing an antidote would be incredibly difficult and would take a very long time. They can't equip every ninja with a gas mask. Those things are expensive, Jingi added. Without an antidote or mass-distributed protective gear, and with Hanzo's strength, it's no wonder Konoha's losses are so high. Damn it. Shikaku's frustration finally broke into a low curse. Jingi, trying to lighten the mood, suggested, "You should send the casualty report up to the village right away. Maybe Hokage-sama will soften and order a withdrawal from the Land of Rain. And remind Hokage-sama to hurry the supplies," Shikaku added. "We can't let the men fight on empty stomachs." Jingi couldn't hold back a chuckle. The image of the third Hokage's face when he read the casualty report amused him. Some people were going to have a very sore posterior when the daimyo and the village elders started asking questions. "Keep your voice down," Shikaku warned, though a half-smile betrayed his own amusement. "The atmosphere in the camp is tense. If someone hears you laughing, you'll get a proper scolding." "I can't help it," Jingi said, still grinning. "What's wrong with a little laughter?" Shikaku tried to suppress a laugh of his own. Jingi's reaction made sense. Everything was collapsing at home. The Land of Rivers had barely erupted into full combat, but the Land of Fire was already in chaos. Tsunagakure's infiltrators were causing widespread panic. The daimyo had even sent envoys from his residence to demand answers from the third Hokage. Was Konoha going to stand by while Tsunagakure ran wild through the Land of Fire? The daimyo still mostly cared about supporting Konoha, but when his own people and assets were being destroyed, his patience wore thin. He was furious, and he had every right to be. Before the daimyo could be placated, fresh trouble came from Rain. The camp's casualties kept climbing, and with supply lines cut, the front was running low on food and ninja tools. How could they keep fighting like that? One bad report after another piled on, and even the usually controlled third Hokage began to fray. "What is Shikaku doing?" Hiruzen demanded after reading the latest damage report. "Iwagakure has withdrawn, Tsunagakure has fallen back, and only we and the Rain remain in the Land of Rain. Why are our losses still getting worse?" The question was almost a breakdown. Homura Mitokado stepped up to calm him. "Hiruzen, you must keep your composure. You are the Hokage." "We misjudged Hanzo," Homura continued quietly. "His poison is far worse than any of us expected. Out of every 100 fallen, 90 had been felled by that gas. The rate was unconscionable." Utatane Koharu pressed, "Have they developed a specific antidote?" "They tried," Hiruzen said, clenching his fists. "They all failed." The third Hokage didn't know whether Jingi truly couldn't make an antidote or was downplaying their chances, and his mouth twitched when the question of Tsunade's involvement came up. He had sent messengers to consult her, but they had been turned away. The silence only deepened his worry. Chapter 117. Either continue to fight or choose to lose. Tsunade was clearly furious about what had happened earlier. Right now, she didn't want to be bothered. Her attention was completely fixed on the Anbu. When the third Hokage went quiet, Utatane Koharu and Homura Mitokado exchanged glances. They both understood that the meeting with Tsunade had not gone well. It seemed the antidote was hopeless. They shifted the conversation to supplies. Whether or not an antidote could be developed, supplies were indispensable. Without them, how could the shinobi at the front line fight? No tools, no food, no fighting. The third Hokage drew a breath and said gravely, "Find a way to send a batch of rations to the frontline camp. Prepare a supply of military rations pills. As for ninja tools, I'll speak with Tsunade about it." The stocks that had been withheld were still in Jingi's control, and the third Hokage had tried to secure them, only to be rebuffed. Jingi refused to hand them over and told him to take the matter up with the Sarutobi clan. After all, the money had been given to the clan, so the clan should answer for the supplies. Once both Tsunade and Jingi dug in their heels, the third Hokage felt defeated. He had tried to be clever before, wanting puppets and supplies without properly paying for them, and now the consequences had come back on him. To prevent his clan from suffering, he'd had to give the funds to the Sarutobi, but that left him with the money spent and the supplies still withheld. At the frontline camp, Jingi told Nawaki and Minato Namikaze, "The supplies needed lately can't be transported by the village. Your training is suspended for now." Without enough medicinal ingredients and without extra meals, the heavy training had to be paused. Camp reserves were dwindling, and Jingi had even canceled the extra rations. If the village couldn't deliver supplies, the men at the camp would have to find their own food, whether by foraging, requisitioning, or worse, stealing. Nawaki sat with his legs crossed, worried. "So everyone will have to fight on an empty stomach?" "That's none of your business," Jingi shot back with a look, then added with another shrug. "It's not that the village has no supplies. Some shipments were intercepted by the Sand Village, and some were burned. That's why nothing's getting through." "The situation will settle soon enough," Jingi continued. "Someone is more anxious than we are." Without supplies, the camp might complain, but the daimyo of the Land of Fire had a different level of anxiety. The longer hostile operatives remained in the Land of Fire, the greater the danger to the daimyo's residents, and the angrier the daimyo grew. If he reacted by cutting support for Konoha, that would be a disaster for the third Hokage. On top of that, the full-scale war in the Land of Rivers had diverted a lot of prepositioned supplies to that front. The Land of Rain camp had been neglected, no priority, no support, left to struggle. Tapping a ceiling scroll, Jingi pulled out a few books and tossed them to Nawaki and the boy with yellow hair. "Since you two have nothing to do, study the basics properly. Nawaki, especially you, if I hadn't tested you myself, I wouldn't have believed that someone who's already graduated from the Ninja Academy could have a knowledge base worse than Minato's." "You're unbelievable," Nawaki grumbled. "Not possible." Minato picked up the books eagerly. He was the studious sort, doing as the teacher told him. Nawaki, on the other hand, felt as though Jingi had sentenced him to death. "Suit yourself," Jingi said coolly. "If your sister asks, I'll tell her your schoolwork is so bad it's unbearable to look at, a real eyesore." Minato snorted with laughter. Nawaki's face flushed. That was too much. "Eyesore? I'll study then." To avoid trouble when he went back to the village, he bit the bullet and opened a book. Strange as it was, after only a few pages, he was already scratching his head and turned to Minato for help. Fortunately, Minato's grades were excellent and he had moved on to advanced studies. Tutoring Nawaki was easy. Jingi didn't expect Nawaki to become a scholar, just not to be as hopeless as the future Naruto, and she'd be satisfied. On the battlefield, Hanzo of the Salamander raised his scythe coldly and finished off a Konoha ninja lying on the ground. After confirming the enemy was dead, he looked back and realized that more than half of the men he had brought were gone. He ground his teeth. Konoha. Iwagakure in the Sand Village had withdrawn, but Konoha remained in the Land of Rain. Hanzo could read the reason at once. Konoha wanted a decisive victory. They would only withdraw if he, Hanzo of the Salamander, accepted defeat. Otherwise, the fighting would continue. "Leader, all the enemies here have been killed, but we," reported one of the Rain Village ninja with a bitter smile, glancing around at the remaining handful of troops. Hanzo set his scythe against a rock and leaned on it, his face behind the gas mask unreadable and grim. If they went on like this, he would end up a commander without an army. Even if Konoha paid dearly, the Rain Village would suffer. Two choices lay before him: continue fighting Konoha to the death, or accept defeat. He was unwilling to concede, but he didn't have the confidence to keep fighting until the end. "Has the Sand Village sent any new intelligence?" he asked. "Yes." A sealing scroll of intelligence was handed to him, sent by Chiyo. Though Chiyo hated Hanzo enough to eat him, after the Sand Village withdrew, she still fed valuable intelligence to the Rain Village. Her motive was clear. By supplying information, she hoped the Rain Village would continue to grind Konoha down. Hanzo understood that the Sand Village's intentions were not benign, but free intelligence was not to be refused. Whether he would fight to the death or step back was his decision alone, not Sand's. The scroll detailed the full-scale war in the Land of Rivers, the turmoil inside the Land of Fire, and the severed supply route to Konoha's camp in the Land of Rain. Hanzo studied it carefully. Every report was recorded in meticulous detail. It could be called extremely considerate. Sacrificing a little intelligence wasn't a loss for the Sand Village. If they could tempt Hanzo and tie down part of Konoha's active forces, the Sand Village would hold the advantage. How far Omegakure and Konoha would go in their fighting was no concern of the Sand Village. Chiyo and the third Kazekage were eager for the Rain and Leaf to tear each other apart. The best outcome, from their point of view, was mutual destruction. That would be ideal for Tsunagakure. For Hanzo, the choice was grim: fight to the death or accept defeat and hand the Rain Village's fate over to the world. To put it politely, it was accepting defeat. More bluntly, it was surrender, which would be to admit that the Rain had fallen and that he had failed. He hated the idea of defeat. Still, the situation was no longer his to choose. Konoha's units on the Land of Rain front were being pulled away because of the full-scale war with the Sand. Casualties kept rising. If the stalemate dragged on, both sides would suffer. Konoha, however, insisted on prolonging it, desperate for the glory of victory, regardless of the price. It wasn't a question of whether Hanzo wanted to fight to the death. Konoha was determined to force him into that position. "Hiruzen Sarutobi must be very proud, right?" Hanzo ground out, looking toward Konoha. He clenched his fists so hard the sealing scroll in his hand crumpled, its paper staining with blood and rain before falling into the mud. Hiruzen, in truth, felt no pride at all. The daimyo's residence had sent another scathing missive, complaining about the chaos in the Land of Fire and demanding that Konoha quash the civil war at once. The third Hokage was tearing out handfuls of his hair in frustration, less concerned with glory than with avoiding further political catastrophe. Notify everyone to assemble. There was no other choice. A final decisive battle would end this war. Omagakure's forces were nearly spent, and Konoha's were stretched thin as well. Casualties mounted, and reinforcements being sent to encircle the enemy in the Land of Fire had depleted the Rain front further. Nara Shikaku handed Jingi a report. After this war, Omegakure won't be able to lift its head for at least 20 years. The combat reports, Anbu investigations, and expert analyses all pointed to the same grim conclusion. The Rain Village had very few fighters left. Years of painstaking recovery had been shattered by this chaos. It wasn't just the present forces that were ruined, the village's future was mortgaged. 20 years? Jingi muttered, taking up the report to read more. The Rain forces are dwindling. The analysis continued, but their leader, Hanzo of the Salamander, remains a huge threat. As long as he survives, the village cannot be beaten. Some individuals sway the course of a war. On the battlefield in the Land of Rain, Hanzo was precisely that kind of man. That said, this theater was only a prelude. The 5 great shinobi nations were still preparing for the much larger conflict to come in the Land of Rivers. "You're right," Nara Shikaku sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sakumo Hatake has been reassigned. Our elite units are stretched thin. Orochimaru and Jiraiya lead their own teams, but even together it will be hard to take down the demigod." "How about we let our ninja hero compete with the demigod?" Jingi suggested, then immediately broke into laughter at the absurdity. Shikaku was equal parts annoyed and amused. "Are you serious?" "Forget the ninja hero," Jingi went on, grinning. "You, Hyuga Jingi, should go personally." "No, I'm just a medic. I can't afford to pick a fight with a famed demigod." Jingi waved his hands, chuckling. No one really believed that. He was, after all, a medical ninja, but he played it off. After a while, he sat up straight. "Let's drag it out. Omegakure can't hold much longer. The demigod will be forced to concede eventually. Victory will come to the village in the long run. If the outcome could be secured by attrition, why send themselves in?" Shikaku could only nod in reluctant agreement. He couldn't order Jingi to the front. He cursed inwardly at the F4 who had complicated medical and combat command. If anyone suggested separating those duties again, he swore he'd smash them with a hammer. It was their bureaucracy that made decisions agonizing. Night fell. Except for those on watch, everyone slept in tents or wooden barracks. With fewer wounded coming in, Jingi had more free time than he'd expected. In one tent, 2 young shinobi were hunched over their studies. Given the enemy's sprint speed is 50 meters per second and the thrown tool's flight speed is 70 meters per second, what angle should the throwing be calculated at? One problem read. Who invented this question? Nawaki buried his face in his hands and wailed. The days of brutal physical training didn't seem so bad now compared to this academic torment. Nawaki was on the verge of tearing the book in two. Little yellow hair scratched his head. Even he, who prided himself on good grades, was getting dizzy. Do they really expect us to compute that? And this one, a Jinin's total chakra is 100. Releasing a D-rank ninjutsu uses 1 chakra. How much chakra does a B-rank ninjutsu consume? Oh my god, just kill me now. The pair tore at their hair in despair. Jingi sat nearby with a book and a pointer stick, expressionless on the outside, but laughing quietly inside. Who had written these questions? Were they riddles or combat calculus? Ridiculous. Nawaki glared at Jingi and tugged Little Yellow Hair's sleeve. They both watched the Hyuga, who had only the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. Nawaki pressed his tongue against his cheek, sure Jingi was mocking them. Little Yellow Hair's face collapsed into a worried look. Jingi rarely hit them, only when deserved, but the threat was there enough to make them squirm. Under their pleading, Minato Namikaze sighed inwardly, rolled his shoulders, and asked the only question left. Teacher, did you learn this stuff back when you were a student? Jingi thought for a beat, then, under the eager, anxious gazes of Nawaki and Minato, shook his head. Sorry, no, I didn't. Chapter 119. Demigods are strong, but they will eventually fall. You don't even study this yourself, so why make us struggle with it? Jingi set the book down with a sigh. When I was your age, I didn't have a teacher. Aside from the lessons at the ninja school, everything was taught collectively by the clan, and those people had terrible tempers. Did they beat people? Nawaki's eyes lit up. Jingi raised the stick in his hand and the boy shrank back, hiding behind Minato Namikaze. No, they'd just call you useless. Jingi tapped the stick menacingly. Imagine being insulted like that in front of the whole clan. Most people would rather take a beating than be humiliated in public. Nawaki and Little Yellow Hair pictured the scene and exchanged glances. Suddenly, it didn't seem so bad. The lessons were hard, and they might get a smack, but at least they wouldn't be publicly shamed. Besides, Jingi only used the stick as a warning. He wasn't out to hurt them. Compared to the clan, they were lucky. Some things leave scars you never forget, Jingi continued. Be thankful you got me. He tossed the stick onto the table, took Nawaki's book, scanned it, and laughed. No wonder your hair's coming out. If it were me, I'd find the person who wrote these questions and give him a good thrashing. Then why do you make us learn? Nawaki demanded, his voice rising several octaves. Minato's smile froze. Because I'm the teacher, Jingi said with a grin. Not you. He burst into laughter. Besides, I didn't buy these books. If you're unhappy, go take it up with Tsunade, if you dare. They didn't dare. Little Yellow Hair wouldn't even think about it, and Nawaki, who was already used to being on the receiving end of Tsunade's temper, kept silent. Jingi relented. Fine, I won't make things harder for you. Look, these are books and notes I got from Orochimaru. Read them and you'll... He pulled a large stack of books and notebooks from under the table, then paused and looked toward the camp's outer edge. Something was out there. Nawaki and Minato Namikaze followed his gaze. Outside the camp was just dense darkness and steady rain. Nothing else showed. Lesson's over, Jingi said. Stay here and don't go out. He quickly gathered the books, pressed both palms to Nawaki and Minato's heads, ruffling their hair as he bent down. I'll let you peek out the window to watch the excitement, but you do not leave the medical quarters unless I say so. Understood? They weren't fools. Jingi's expression told them something was wrong. The two boys nodded vigorously, promising to behave. Teacher, are the enemies preparing to attack the camp? More or less. Our demigod has arrived. Jingy gave a reassuring smile and rubbed little yellow hair's head. Don't worry. Your teacher isn't helpless. Demigods are powerful. Yes, but even gods can fall. At the back of the camp, Hanzo of the Salamander, who had led the Rain Village's ninja on a wide flanking sweep, finally reached the area. Using intelligence from the Sand Village, Hanzo had taken a long detour intending to strike the Konoha camp and make this the decisive battle of the Land of Rain. Many of Konoha's shinobi had been dispatched, with casualties taken and many more still active on the battlefield. Few remained in camp. Many were old, weak, injured, or lying in the medical room. Strongs like Orochimaru and Jiraiya were out on the field. Hanzo had chosen the perfect moment to strike. After warning Nawaki and Minato again, Jingy closed the door, motioned toward the dark, and strode into the rainy night. The two Anbu squads guarding the medical quarters moved into position immediately. A signal flare shot from Jingy's hand and burst into the sky like a rocket. The quiet camp instantly exploded into activity. Nara Shikaku, agonizing in the command center, rushed outside. Watching the dying flare, his heart sank. Only two people could deploy that signal, himself and Jingy. Whoever had fired it meant a powerful enemy was attacking. Hanzo of the Salamander? As the flare climbed, the Konoha camp erupted into a roar of preparations. The Rain Village forces outside, still unprepared, froze in surprise. They had taken a long detour, shut down the watchmen along the way, and expected to infiltrate undetected, but they had been discovered before they even triggered a single trap. How? Hanzo's confusion gave way to anger. He had wasted the detour. Now there was no point hiding. "Follow me! Attack!" he bellowed, forming seals and slamming his palm to the ground. There was a thunderous boom and a cloud of smoke. A giant summoned beast appeared outside the camp, a colossal poisonous salamander fish. Its body was laced with venom, and its size rivaled that of Gamabunta of Mount Myoboku. It was a fearsome vanguard, lethal, enormous, and terrifyingly powerful. With a scream that sounded almost human, the beast charged for the camp fence. Any camp would have boundary traps to prevent precisely this kind of assault. Charging blind like this would get anyone killed before they reached the walls. The Rain Village didn't have the manpower to waste, so Hanzo used the monstrous salamander fish as the spearhead. The ground shook as its massive form thundered forward. With a deafening crash, the poisonous salamander fish collided with the camp's fence. Chapter 120. Deicide? Then I, Hyuga Shizuka, will try. The earthen and wooden wall burst inward with a single brutal impact. Traps along the barricade detonated in sequence, but to the poisonous salamander fish, they were nothing more than an irritation. Screams tore through the rainy night. Those unlucky enough to be near the wall were struck by flying timber and rubble. Then a long, thick tongue shot out. The salamander's tongue wrapped around nearby Konoha shinobi and swallowed them whole. The sight of comrades disappearing into that maw froze many in place. Kill! With the defenses broken and the camp's wall breached, Hanzo of the Salamander led his men inside. Chaos erupted across the camp. Lord! The medics and the Anbu guarding the medical ward clustered around Jingy. Protect the medical ward. Do not let the enemy harm the wounded under any circumstances. Jingy ordered. He wouldn't allow the medical guards or the Anbu to join the front line. Their duty was clear: keep the wounded safe. They obeyed without hesitation. Hanzo moved through the rain like a shadow, sleek and lethal, scythe in hand like a reaper come to harvest. Wherever he passed, Konoha shinobi collapsed amid screams. Hanzo! Nara Shikaku lifted a hand, preparing to ensnare the intruder with his shadow. But Hanzo was too fast. His body flicker technique left after images in his wake. The Konoha fighters simply couldn't track him. A cold warning ran through Deerheart's chest. He dove aside just in time. Boom. The tongue slammed into the spot Shikaku had just vacated, leaving a jagged crater. Had Shikaku been a moment slower, the salamander's blast would have maimed or killed him. He cursed his inability to halt the monster. The Rain Village shinobi could be handled, but Hanzo, this demigod, was on another level. The Nara fighting style favored evasion and support, not a head-on clash with someone like Hanzo. Shikaku's sacrifice, however, had at least bought time for others. Can't stop him, Deerheart muttered, and with a grim set to his jaw, he sprinted for the medical ward. The camp's best fighters were all over the battlefield. Hanzo had chosen his moment perfectly. Deerheart could only try to draw the killer away. Encirclement was pointless. Hanzo was coated in horrible poison and backed by that summoned behemoth. A single poisonous breath could devastate them. Surrounding him would only invite disaster. Jingi, didn't you say you wanted to slay a god? The god's right here. Don't thank me. Deerheart yelped as he saw Jingi approaching and shouted to draw his attention. Jingi paused. Hanzo, standing atop the poisonous salamander fish, frowned. Slay a god, him? Senior, are you really going to trick me like this? Jingi's face registered only weary resignation. He had the thought, sure, but saying it aloud would only paint a target on his back. Nara Shikaku landed beside Jingi with a pained smile. My apologies. I had no choice. I couldn't stop him. I can only ask this of you. There weren't many shinobi left in the camp who could face Hanzo and his summoned beast. The Rain Village attackers were manageable. The real threat was Hanzo and the poisonous salamander fish. If Jingi could handle them, Shikaku could offer support, if needed. Hanzo narrowed his eyes and studied Jingi from his perch. You must be Hyuga Jingi, the one Chiyo mentioned. That's me. Jingi nodded and withdrew a sealing scroll from his robes. Slay a god, he murmured to himself. He wasn't bluffing. Hanzo snorted at the sight of the scroll. A Hyuga without Byakugan, and you play with puppets? How quaint. Someone leaked my info, but it's irrelevant now. Jingi smiled faintly, then flung the sealing scroll into the storm. Thank you, demigod, for providing a stepping stone. Hanzo's expression darkened. Did the Hyuga mean to climb over him for fame? He laughed then, incredulous, and tore the scroll open. Hundreds of black shadows spilled out across the wet earth, each pair of eyes glowing faint green. The shadows surged toward Hanzo and the poisonous salamander fish without any visible puppeteer. Jingi's puppets charged freely. Hanzo bristled. Just a few little puppets to deal with me? He barked, enraged. He raised his scythe and cleaved at the nearest puppet. The salamander coiled its tongue and swallowed several of the dark figures whole. Deerheart involuntarily gave the beast a thumbs up. Brave little monster, daring to eat Jingi's puppets. But the puppets had been prepared for exactly that. One that Hanzo severed exploded in a deadly burst. The salamander, which had gulped down many of them, immediately began to howl in agony. The external blast tore away a chunk of its scalp, but the worst damage came from within. Explosions detonated inside the beast's belly, where the puppets had been swallowed. The great creature writhed violently, coughing up chunks of flesh and oozing organs and debris. No summoned beast could survive a powerful internal detonation intact. The poisonous salamander fish's gluttony had become fatal. This is impossible. Hanzo roared as his mount rolled and spasmed on the ground, its cries echoing through the rain. He watched helplessly as the creature writhed, blood slicking the mud. Kill it! Hanzo shouted, unwilling to accept the outcome. Jingi did not plan to let the creature go. If he could turn that poisonous salamander fish into a puppet, it would be a nightmare weapon to unleash on the enemy. He moved to finish what he'd started.